And I'm telling you folks, right there, how white folks got so rich. The untold story of American white supremacy. I mean, I just read about the Indian land grab, and I'm like, my gosh, man, good Lord. No wonder we don't want to teach the truth. No wonder we don't want to teach the truth. Because that means we've got to look people in the face and say, our forefathers were the worst people in the history of mankind.
By 14th century, colonial powers established their colonies in African continents, taking their labor, taking their resources, taking their wealth, subjugating them to exploitation. When this is the 14th century, when this was happening, later on, interest developed and people, white people or European, started having interest in taking these people to also work for them back in their countries. And this is when they started doing what is called slavery. So when they went to Africa, they started developing interest. They saw, oh, these Africans, they have resources. These Africans, they're so masculine, they can work in our farms. These Africans, we can take these natural resources from them and get back to them with their. But they questioned themselves, where will we get people to work for us? Where will we get majority of people to build for us these resources? And that's when they saw to it that, we need to take some Africans with us and get to them through ships and work for us back there, because they saw Africans working for them here in Africa, because they were subjugated to exploitation. Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video we are going to talk about something so interesting, and I want us to watch these videos because people are talking about reparation. Who should be getting reparation? And apart from that, something really interesting. There's this gentleman who questions his forefathers, saying that his forefathers were lazy, saying that his forefathers were the worst in human history. So I want us to watch these videos, and then, you know, as usual, we're gonna come back after this course. I have to talk about this. Why are you gonna tell me what you think about this? And I'm also gonna tell you how I feel about this, because this is a long due topic that I feel like most of people, creators, have talked about this, but again, we need to have different perspectives of this. What does the Europeans, what does the white people say about this issue? Join me, and you're gonna see me at the back of the video. We're gonna have a talk about this. Let's just jump right into the video.
The only reason anybody would be against reparations is if they don't feel that this country has anything to repair in how it has treated and continues to treat black folks.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for whom none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea.
First off, Mitch, you were alive 100 years ago. Look at you. Second, reparations are not just about slavery. They're about repairing the incessant harm that has been done to black people in this country since we were stolen and brought here, and that does not end with slavery. These people act like Jim Crow was just like a minor inconvenience. It was violence. And I don't know if y'all been looking around lately, but basically reparations should be owed for what was done like 15 minutes ago in this country.
We've, tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war.
If the Civil War was really about righting the wrongs of slavery, then we wouldn't have all these Confederate flags and Confederate statues still just confederating around to this day. To this day!
By passing landmark civil rights legislation.
These people wake up every morning to undo civil rights legislation.
We've elected an African-American president.
Now you know you ain't vote for Barack. We need to become reparationists. We need to make preparations for reparations. And I say that comes with us first making reparations a part of our culture. This should be a part of our lifestyle. And we should be demanding that reparations be given to us by whoever is in the presidency and by whoever wants to be president. And also by our local and state governments. And I don't think that means just waiting to the last minute of an election and saying that we're not going to vote for you unless you give us reparations. Nah. We should be getting behind candidates who already believe in this. And all you white folks who want to be down, baby, you better be reparationists too. That's the new question for your white friends. Do you believe black people should get reparations? See, reparations are not a capital gain. They're an ethical practice. Because in a society where advancement is determined by money, the only way to correct the systematic hindrance of that advancement is by providing money. Reparations are not some far-reaching thing that have never been figured out before. We need to stop looking at reparations as something we need to imagine. Consider them as something that is very real that needs to happen. What we need to imagine is what we are going to do with the reparations to make sure that our community and ourselves are taken care of. We need to become reparationists.
And I'm telling you folks, right there, how white folks got so rich. The untold story of American white supremacy. I mean, I just read about the Indian land grab, and I'm like, my gosh, man, good Lord. No wonder we don't want to teach the truth. No wonder we don't want to teach the truth. Because that means we've got to look people in the face and say, our forefathers were the worst people in the history of mankind. The things that they did, that manifest destiny, that kind of mentality has been atrocious. What we have done to the African Americans. The estimated number of wealth that came from slavery, from free labor, and that's what it was. And they estimate that the amount of money that came from slavery was around $24 trillion. You can't even grasp that much money. The average person has a hard time grasping what $1 billion is. $1 trillion. Holy shit. And a lot of people don't want to admit the truth, because a lot of people also are scared that what happens if we actually do have to maybe pay reparations. Understand that everything, that beautiful Capitol in Washington, D.C. was built by slave labor. The majority of the churches in this country were built by slave labor. Our forefathers were lazy. And if they were smart, which they were, but the problem was they were cunning. It's sad. And I'm telling you folks,
when white people in the United States balk at the idea of paying reparations to black Americans who descended from slaves, they disagree with the Bible. Reparations are a form of compensation or restitution made to those who have suffered injustice, particularly those in cases of racial inequality, discrimination, and slavery. The idea of paying reparations to black Americans is not a new one. It has been a topic of discussion for decades, if not centuries. However, it has gained renewed attention and support in recent years, following the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and the growing recognition of systemic racism in American society. As a Christian, I believe that reparations are not only a matter of justice and equity, but also a reflection of God's character and values. In the Bible, we see numerous examples of God's concern for the oppressed, the marginalized, and the downtrodden. From the Israelites' liberation from slavery in Egypt to the ministry of Jesus among the poor and the outcast, we see a consistent theme of God's love for those who are on the margins of society. One of the key biblical principles that underlie the idea of reparations is the concept of restitution. In the book of Leviticus, we see God commanding the Israelites to make restitution to those whom they have wronged. Leviticus 6:1-5 says, "If anyone sins and commits a breach of faith against the Lord by deceiving his neighbor in a matter of deposit or security or through robbery, or if he has oppressed his neighbor or has found something lost and lied about it, swearing falsely in any of all the things that people do and sin thereby, if he has sinned and has realized his guilt and will restore for what he took by robbery, when he got it by oppression, or deposit that was committed to him, or the lost thing that he found, or anything about which he has sworn falsely, he shall restore in full, and shall add a fifth to it, and give it to him to whom it belongs on the day that he realizes his guilt. This passage emphasizes the importance of making restitution to those who have been wronged, and not just restoring what was taken, but adding to it as a form of compensation. This principle of restitution can be applied to the issue of reparations to Black Americans who have suffered centuries of enslavement, discrimination, and systemic oppression. Another biblical principle that supports the idea of reparations is the concept of Jubilee. In Leviticus 25, God commands the Israelites to observe a Jubilee every 50th year, during which all debts are forgiven, all slaves to be set free, and all property to be returned to its original owners. This was a radical idea of economic justice designed to prevent the accumulation of wealth and power in the hands of a few, and to ensure that all members of society had equal access to resources and opportunities. The idea of Jubilee can be seen as a model for reparations in that it seeks to address the root causes of inequality and oppression rather than just treating the symptoms. By forgiving debts, freeing slaves, and returning property, Jubilee seeks to create a more just and equitable society, one in which everyone has the opportunity to flourish. As a Christian, I believe paying reparations to Black Americans is only a matter of justice and equity, but also it is a reflection of God's values and character. Through the biblical principles of restitution and Jubilee, we see a model for how we can address the historical and systemic injustices that have plagued our society for far too long. While the issue of reparations is complex and contentious, I believe that as Christians, we have a responsibility to seek justice.
Why do Black people deserve reparations for something they weren't alive for? That's a great question. Let's ask Sarah Beth what she thinks. This is Jebediah. Jebediah inherited over 100 acres of land, his father's South Carolina plantation in the late 1800s. He was able to use the money from that land to buy 100 more acres. In the mid-1950s, passed the land down to his son, Mark, who then sold the land for $5 million. Mark started a successful real estate company that he passed down to his son, Tim. Tim was able to take all of the wealth that he generated basically because he was just born. This is his daughter, Sarah Beth. Sarah Beth was able to go to the best schools, live in the best neighborhoods, and have the most wonderful extracurricular activities. He's now getting an engineering degree from Syracuse, already has jobs lined up on Wall Street, has never had to work a job. Are we really going to look Sarah Beth in her cold, dead eyes and tell her that she doesn't deserve the opportunities that's been afforded to her just because she wasn't born when the wealth is accumulated? To be quite honest, I don't know. Do descendants of enslaved Black people deserve reparations? Absolutely. You bet your bottom dollar. But I think that we have unfortunately reached past the point where it would become too complicated to figure out how to disperse reparations and who gets them. Me personally, for example, I know that I descend from enslaved Black people on both sides of my family, but the records are too skewed and all over the place to the point where I don't know how I would actively prove that to like the IRS or somebody. And that's the case for millions of Black Americans right now. And then lastly, do we really have the faith that our government is competent enough to pull something like that off? Because I recall 2 years ago where the government completely botched stimulus checks and relief aid during the pandemic. So do we deserve reparations? Absolutely. But at this point, I don't know if it's possible.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. So if you ask me, does a Black person, especially Black people in the United States, deserves reparation? Well, that's a question that somebody might ask you or ask me as a person or as a creator who talks about this discourse. I will say yes, because the following are the reasons that why I'll say yes. First is historical injustice. The historical injustice preludes to the fact that Black people deserve to get reparation because slavery happened. Yes, I know it sounds like deja vu. Slavery happened. A Black person was taken outside Africa without their consent, and they were taken, they were put to work in those farms where they planted cotton. Name all those things, what they did. And something interesting also comes when we talk about when a black person was taken outside Africa to go and work in those farms in the United States. People who facilitated this also are fellow Africans, especially chiefs, kings of those times, the leaders who are those times. Yes, this is the truth. This thing happened, and there were so many ways that they did things. However, there is a contradictory between why they preferred African slaves and why African leaders sold fellow Africans as slaves. Now listen, there is one thing called pioneering. Pioneering is the situation where the African leaders used to sell the debtors. People who couldn't pay their debts were sold as slaves, put in the ship, and then taken back during that transatlantic slave trade. Let me give you the African perspective of slavery and how this thing happened. Now, when the debtors were sold because they couldn't pay their debts, that kind of makes sense, right? Now, the second reason why slaves were sold by African leaders is because the history says that some of them were weak. Now, this is the contradictory. Why would you sell a person as a slave because they are weak? The main agenda of the colonizers or these people who took slaves from Africa were for these people to go and work for them. So if these people are working for them, why did they take them with them, these weak people? That's where there is a discrepancy. However, I also recognize the fact that we have our African leaders who played a part in selling of other folks. And I think this is alluded to some works in the Bible, which shows how some people were sold. Like, I can't recall it so much well, but we also have how it is alluded in the Bible where a person was sold. Like, for example, Joseph was sold by his brothers, to a foreign land, and then Joseph himself became a leader. So if you look at this symbolically, can't tell you how black folks today, some of them are really thriving in some sectors. So that being said, we having the second reason as to why I think that a black person, especially a black person in the United States, deserves reparation. The number two reason is post-emancipation oppression. What do I mean by post-emancipation oppression? Even after the abolition of slavery, black Americans faced systemic racism, violence, for example, lynching, massacres like the Tulsa Race Massacre, and the legal discrimination. What you're talking about is the Jim Crow. Systemic racism and the Jim Crow, even after the slave trade was abolished. We have Christian missionaries who saw to it that it's not okay for us to sell, to just trade human being, because human beings are sacred. After that's happening, people still use this as an advantage, where now they started systemic racism, Jim Crow, Another thing which it's common that people always look into while we're talking about this is economic disparities. We have wealth gap between the blacks and the whites in the United States especially. And there's also a mark in Africa, because people always ask why Africa is still poor. Africa is still poor for the first reason is because the African leaders. The second one is because of colonization. However, there is still some people who still debate that colonization at least woken up Africa. I don't know to which context. Do you agree with this? Kindly tell me. But that's not the point of discussion. The point of discussion is this: wealth gap between black people and white people in the United States. Now, there's a significant racial wealth gap in the United States. According to data, the median wealth of white families is substantially higher than the black families. A disparity rooted in historical injustice and ongoing discrimination. So there's a video that I created around 3 weeks ago. There's this gentleman, he was a white dude. He was trying to explain that it is easier to find a 15-year-old white man or white boy or girl who has a lot of wealth, which they acquired generationally. And also think that this video also discusses that for some point. They acquired this wealth generationally. So when they acquired this wealth generationally, it means that this is something that they never worked for it. But for a black person, it is not the same. Today, go and ask a black person. Who already have their wealth, probably at their 50s or 60s. Go and ask them, maybe mid 45, 50s and 60s. Ask them, where did you get this wealth? They tell you that they never inherited the wealth. They worked for them to get this wealth, you know. So if they work to get this wealth, this shows you that it takes a black person sweat for them to work in order to acquire the amount of wealth that a 14-year-old white boy or white guy has. And that shows you how deep the issue of economic disparities, especially when you're talking about the wealth gaps between black people and white people. So this is a blueprint that shows that indeed a black person needs to be reparated. And reparation is not even just it's not even just indemnifying you, or it's not just returning you to your original state. But the reason for reparation is to also restore some historical injustices, like the massacres which happened, like you know, the lynching massacres, like the Tulsa race massacre which happened. We need to restore. Those are the kind of facts that needs to be restored. So you get the point, right? Also, another reason is denied opportunities. Black Americans were systemically excluded from wealth building opportunities, such as property ownership, access to quality education, and fair employment, through discriminatory practices like riddling and segregation. Segregation was a way that these people used to exclude potential black people who have had the skills, who can beat the people who are who have been employed to work per se in a given facility. And this is part of the Jim Crow. This is part of the systemic racism which is happening until today. So that really tells you that really a black person needs to be indemnified, to be reparated, you know. We have some government policies. The New Deal and GI Bill. Many New Deal programs and the GI Bill, which help millions of Americans build wealth and achieve middle class status, were often inaccessible to black Americans due to discriminatory implantation. Still takes you back to segregation, part of this talk. We have mass incarnation. The criminal injustice system disappropriately targets black Americans, leading to high rates of incarnation, you know, incarceration, which disrupts families and communities and limits economic opportunities. We have something like cultural and psychological impacts that these things have left black people with. So reparations can't just be financial, you know. Rather, there are so much ways in which these people can be indemnified and returned back to their original state, where equality starts. And some people, equality is justice. That's why it's not easier for a black person in America to get justice, to get reparated. This video is for educational purposes, as you can see. We have moral and ethical considerations, justice and equity. This is something that I've talked about. Reparations are seen as a means to address the moral wrongs of slavery and systemic racism, providing a path towards justice and equity. Reconciliation, that's another form of reparation. Reparation can be part of a broader process of reconciliation, acknowledging past wrongs and fostering a more inclusive and equitable society. You make a world a better place for you and me. Because, see, there is no way that we can right the wrongs without people who oppressed others coming out clearly and stating the wrongs that they did, specifically to the black people, you know. So this thing, something which happened, and it is not good, you know. And so you have to tell me what you think about this in the comment section. As you know, this is your presenter, Eugene, Docu Stories, Eugene from Kenya. And until then, let's meet you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.